So I want to thank Professor Wang Guoyu for the invitation. I wouldn't be here without her invitation to visit the Institute of Technology, Ethics, and the Human Future, and Pan Sisi for making all the arrangements, and then to all the faculty and students, and especially Jia Chung, who's really been doing extra duty in keeping me from getting lost, and Jian too for helping me make my phone work by loaning me that box. So there's these 3 talks. You already know that. I don't have to spend any time on it. I do this to sort of get myself oriented. So there'll be another one next Monday. But I'm making 3 claims. I'll make these 3 claims throughout all 3 talks. First of all, that engineering and technology are the primary ethical political challenges of our time. And secondly, that engineering, which is the active making of technology, is as important, if not more important, than technology, the things made. And third, when thinking of the ethics of engineering and technology, ethics is not enough. It's insufficient. Politics and political philosophy are as important, if not more important, than ethics. So I'm going to be working with those in different ways throughout the 3 talks. Some terminological clarifications. Engineering is a distinct kind of human making. It's making material objects or making digital objects too. Engineers do make digital objects. Digital objects have their own kind of existence. One that draws on modern scientific knowledge to construct the artifact of the world. Our world is increasingly becoming an artifact. We sometimes make a distinction between the contemporary world, which is more and more an artifact, and as a result of engineering, and what's called a carpentered world, a world produced by craft, handcraft. The carpentered world has a different character than the engineered artifact. I'll be talking more about that as we go along. Technologies are the physical elements of the world as artifact. They are what engineering produces. Often there is this field called philosophy of technology, which I've been arguing for a little while needs to be supplemented with a philosophy of engineering, because the technologies are out there and they're sort of, these things, right? But and these things all have influence on us, impact on us. So philosophy of technology has often sort of emphasized the artifacts themselves and their influence on us and the way we use them or don't use them properly. I think that's inadequate. We need to drill into the dynamics, the dynamo that's producing this, and that's engineering. Now, in English, the technology can also be used as an umbrella term that includes all kinds of engineering. Like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology includes mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering. So in that sense of the use, it's a broad term, but it's a broad term that includes engineering as sort of like artifacts themselves inside an institutional configuration, like a technological university. There's conceptual issues in the difference between the English word engineering and the Chinese word gongcheng. Right? Gongcheng seems to mean, I'm not proficient enough in Chinese to really argue this, but from people I know who argue it, they say that the term in Chinese means more a project in which what in English we would call engineers are the dominant force. Engineering is distinct from artisanal making, what I call craft techniques. There's a difference between techniques, again, manual craft making, and technology or engineering. Very different kinds of activities. There's not a hard line, a hard distinction between them. There's always things in the middle between craft and engineering. But so there's a little bit of a spectrum. On the one end, craft, making with your hands, trial and error making, constructing, and on the other hand, designing, like engineers do, drawing on the knowledge that comes from science, which the crafter, the artisan, doesn't do. The artisan may have intuitive knowledge about, and will have intuitive knowledge about the character of the world, but it's not scientific knowledge that's the basis of the artist or the craftsman. A pause here. I tend to get talking too fast. If I start talking too fast and you don't understand me, slow me down. You can say, time out, slow down. I'll try to catch myself some. And feel free to interrupt and ask a clarifying question at any point. Stop me. I don't mind being stopped. Like one time I was talking at another university and I was using something, I don't remember what it was, I was trying to play Chinese and use some Chinese term, and I used it, and the students could not figure out what in the world I was talking about, right? And it went on for an hour, and finally at the end, somebody said, Professor Mitchum, what is that? What were you talking about? And I said again, and they said, we had a back and forth, and they found, oh, this is what you meant, and they pronounced it correctly, right? So if I use the term gongcheng, and you think, what the heck is he talking about? Stop me, right? Ask for clarification. What is that word you're saying? With English words, you can do it too, okay? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I've got the terms and my claims and a clarification of the words in my claims. But now, here's the big thing that I'm trying to do. The series of lectures are titled Political Philosophy of Technology. What I would like them to have been titled is the technological political problem. But I thought that was a little abstruse, a little more unclear. But now I want to say why what I'm really trying to do is, and what I think is the problem that grabs me, the technological political problem. And I understand this on the analogy of the theological political problem. Has anybody ever heard that term, the theological political problem?
Is that a philosophy?
No, there's a great book by a classic philosopher titled Tractatus Theologico Politicus. Nobody's heard of that. Anybody read Spinoza? Right? Spinoza has, the ethics. That's what everybody knows. But his second most important work is the Tractatus Theologico Politicus, or in Latin, Theological Political Tractate. Right? He has another book called Tractatus Politicus. He wrote in Latin. And here is the problem that Spinoza analyzes. Spinoza is an atheist. He's a critic of religion. He thinks religion has done terrible damage to European civilization. Why has it done such damage? Because it introduces into the political realm a kind of fanaticism and certainty that is inappropriate to the political realm. In the West, the three so-called Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all make the claim that God spoke directly to them. When God says it, you don't question it. Now, there's lots of different disagreements about what different Christian sects think God said, but whatever they think God said it. Well, if God said it, it's certain. And you better do it, right? And so what happened in Europe, actually beginning in the early Middle Ages, is different religious groups claiming that God had spoken directly to them would slaughter other people who didn't believe them. Right? What you see going on in the Middle East today was going on in Europe in the 1400s and the 1500s. In the Middle East, you have different Muslim sects slaughtering each other because the Shia don't believe that the Sunni are true Muslims. So if there's a group of Shia in control, as they are in Iran, for instance, and some Sunni walk in, or convert. I mean, Islam converted lots of the area of the Middle East all the way to China, right? Under the threat of the sword. If you don't believe like me, off with their heads. Right? This was creating constant slaughter among each other. What's going on in the Middle East today was going on in Europe in the 1400s and 1500s. Spinoza said, enough, it's enough. The way out of this is to criticize strongly the whole idea of revelation, that's the only way to deal with it. Attack revelation, the notion of revelation as being false. Right? To use MacIntyre's favorite term, incoherent. So the notion of revelation, and this is the theological political problem, does not apply to non-divine revelation-based religions. It doesn't apply to Confucianism, for instance. It doesn't apply to Taoism. It doesn't apply to Buddhism. It doesn't apply to the numerous shamanistic indigenous religions that are all over the world. It doesn't apply to Hinduism, although Hinduism is becoming infected by the notion of divine revelation. But this notion, if you abstract from the notion of revelation and we just all are here with whatever natural knowledge we have, political discussion about how we're going to organize our relationships becomes a much calmer affair. Now, not always totally calm. There's always a warlord who decides he's going to take charge. But he's going to take charge simply on the basis of power. He has a bigger gun than other people. He's not going to take charge on the basis of God's telling him, right? So revelation, according to Spinoza, introduces a fundamental distortion into the natural life world, as Husserl would call it. I want to argue that technology does the same thing, that it introduces into the natural world, into the carpentered world, into the world as artifact, a kind of distortion of how we live. Now, I'll be trying to unpack that in detail. Here's the problem stated as a theological political problem. Engineering and its technologies create a conflict with politics analogous to that between reason and revelation. Any questions at this point? Make sense? Okay. So here's going back, sort of restating the theological political problem. Absent revelation, the natural state, most people in the world do not believe in revelation, right? And most people in history, most of the time, have not thought that this supernatural, Abrahamic, Jewish, Christian, Islamic kind of God exists, that created the world out of nothing and created human beings in their own image. And of course, if human beings in the God's image, then they can do things like God does and, slaughter people. So the natural state, absent revelation, human action and political order are shot through with recognized fallibility, qualification, and contingency. Again, I will argue that. We'll try to unpack that as we go along. It's a great chapter in MacIntyre that does that. Under conditions of divine revelation, human action and political order become infected with an authority or certainty that tends toward the fanatical. It is difficult for politics to know how to respond or to handle revelation, and it's difficult for politics to know how to respond and handle technology and engineering. The most obvious example of that in our world today is climate change. Right? We don't know what to do. Sometimes we think we know what to do, but we can't actually get going to do it. Okay, what happened there? Did I have two things that are saying? Oh, it's reiterating. It's taking the theological, political, and so on. Okay, so I've said that. I don't need to say it again. Two types of world, and maybe I won't. Maybe I've sort of already mentioned that point. Okay, these texts have been circulated. I think I meant to make them available, and just a quick word on each one. These are all pieces that I've written over a long period of time, beginning in 1996. This is about MacIntyre, who I'm really happy that Professor Wong, when she invited me, sort of tasked me with reading MacIntyre again, because she's teaching us. How many are in her seminar on After Virtue? Anybody? Okay. All right. So I read After Virtue shortly after it was published, and I have how many pages of notes? I don't know, 23 pages of single-space notes from. I went and dug it out of my computer. And then I've reread it. It's a great book. It's really a great book. I don't think I realized how great a book it was when I read it originally, and I certainly have forgotten it. I'm aware of MacIntyre you can't ignore in the background. And when I first paid attention to him, I criticized him for not taking account of technology. That's what this article is. Starts out with MacIntyre. Starts out with MacIntyre's claim about the three moral problems. They're all technologies, right? Nuclear weapons, abortion, and healthcare. They're all technologies. And our moral debates about using those are unsolvable. He doesn't mention that they're technologies. He sort of ignores the most obvious thing about those problems. So this is a criticism of him for that. And I sort of thought, hey, I've done it with MacIntyre, you know. But Professor Wong got me to read it again, and I haven't done with MacIntyre. It's good. I mean, I'm grateful to her for that. Okay, and I'm going to be talking about Leo Strauss, and here's a couple of this is a short piece, a review of a discussion of Leo Strauss in a book. It's a book review. This is an interview that was done with me by a Russian philosopher of engineering, Alexandra Kazakova, who is now studying at the University of the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing. She's a graduate student. And this paper, Political Philosophy of Technology After Leo Strauss, The Question of Sovereignty, this is on using Strauss to think political philosophy of technology. And this is a review of Francis Fukuyama's Liberalism and Its Discontents. Now, this is the most recent piece, and it's the most relevant for getting a handle on what I'm calling the technological political problem. And I'll make more use of it later, but if you wanted to read this, I think it makes the case. Okay, I've got to watch my time here because I've got to give myself time to read the formal paper. Okay, here are 4 people that I think are political philosophers of technology. By that, I mean engineering and technology. And George Grant, I'm not going to say that much of. I think he's really important. The reason his picture is in black and white is because I'm not going to be able to pay as much attention. But as part of my project, the larger piece I'm trying to put together, to write, to use MacIntyre's term, my project, Grant will be important. And you notice there's 4 generations here. Leo Strauss, born in 1899, George Grant, 1918, MacIntyre, 1929, and Pierre Manet in 1949. So we've got over a period of time here. And we have a distribution of Jewish, Protestant, British Catholic, who's also a Marxist, and a French Catholic. British Catholics, English Catholics are very different than French Catholics. Why is that? What makes them different? What makes them different is that a French Catholic lives in a country that is still politically supporting the Catholic Church. It is not, it's officially a secular state, but priests are paid by the government. So it has a, whereas in England, if you're a Catholic, you've got to support the priest. You've got to pay his salary. It's not supported by the government. So it's a little bit different. And there was, France has a history of rebellion against the Catholic Church, namely the French Revolution, right? Whereas the British have a tradition simply of separating themselves from the Catholic Church. And the Queen of England now is the head of the Anglican Protestant Church. She has no theological education at all, but she's the head, like the Pope in England. Or it's he now, it's he, Charles III, sorry. The Queen's dead. Even the head of the church doesn't live forever. Okay, a few more comparisons that I'm going to mine. What was the fundamental transformative experience of these four philosophers? For Leo Strauss, it was Nazism. He was a Jew, born in rural Germany, raised in a conventionally pious Orthodox family, and of course, the rest of his family were slaughtered by the Holocaust. He escaped to the United States. He escaped first to France, then to England, then the United States. He's a truly great philosopher. All four of these people are truly great. We don't know for sure about Manet yet. He's not as close to the end of his life as MacIntyre is. But Strauss and MacIntyre are undoubtedly great philosophers. They'll be remembered for centuries. Their work will have influence for centuries. For George Grant, the defining experience which drove him to think philosophically was the loss of Canadian sovereignty. Canada is just really a satellite of the United States. Canadians don't like to think that, but George Grant, who's a Canadian, realized it when Diefenbaker, a prime minister, was defeated for re-election in the early 1950s because he did some things that the United States president didn't like. And when the United States president said, we don't like him and we're going to punish Canada if they elect him again, he lost the election. And Grant said, we're just a colony. We don't have true sovereignty. And this sort of blew him away. And why did they lose their sovereignty? Because of technology, the overwhelming technological dominance of the United States. And that drove him to Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss was the single biggest influence on George Grant. MacIntyre's big experience was the failure of socialism. He was a working class Marxist in England and discovered nationalism trumps socialism. The search for money. Capitalism trumps socialism. Nationalism trumps socialism, at least in England. What do you do? From that, it's very similar to George Grant. It's the decline of France. He too experiences sort of the United States as the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and tries to figure out what to do about it. And the the weakness of the European Union, the failure of the European Union as an attempt to counterbalance the United States after World War II. It has no spine. It's maybe trying to get a little spine as a result of Russia and Ukraine, but it doesn't really have it. Interactions. Well, I think maybe I've said enough given what my time is here. Maybe quickly, Strauss is a Platonist, a political conservative. Both Grant and Manet sought out Strauss, but disagreed with him about the theological political problem. For Leo Strauss resurrected the theological political problem from Spinoza. Strauss's first book is Spinoza's Critique of Religion. It's a big, thick book. And he says that his defining problem is the theological political problem, because he sees the fanaticism of revelation religions as also manifest in Nazism. Nazism is a kind of secular form of a fanaticism that was influenced by the notion of revelation. And Strauss sees a fundamental tension, stronger opposition between philosophy and religion. That's the theological political problem for Strauss. And I'll be saying more about that next time. Grant, as I already said, deeply influenced, but he's more a mystic and a tormented public intellectual. He's an Augustinian theologically, and he's a Platonist, but he's a Christian Platonist, whereas Strauss is a Greek Platonist, a classical Greek Platonist. MacIntyre is a Christian Aristotelian. He's not an Aristotelian Christian. He's a Christian Aristotelian. He's Christian first. And before that, he was kind of a communitarian anarchist. He mostly ignores or dismisses Strauss, Grant, and Manet. Not completely Manet. He's in dialogue with Manet. They're both alive, so they talk to each other. He's most agonistic. He likes to argue with you. Grant, he's more a poet in the way he writes. Strauss is much more ironic, subdued, cool. MacIntyre is not cool. He's cool in one sense, but he's not cool in the jazz sense, you know. He's okay. Manet is a Catholic Eurosceptic nationalist. He was a student of, before he was a student of Strauss, he was a student of Ramon Aron. Ramon Aron is the most influential public intellectual in France from the end of the Second World War to the 1980s, when he died, who was not an existentialist. So Sartre was, Ramon Aron and Sartre were very close. They roomed together in college. But Aron thought existentialism is nuts. And so he's cool in a different sense, too. What else do I have on here? Maybe that's it. Okay.